42 years, Walter walked the same 6 miles of Millbrook Falls, 5 days a week, delivering the mail on what everyone simply called Route 9. He wore the same navy windbreaker for so long that it faded from blue to something closer to grey, and he carried a leather satchel that had belonged to his father before him. The leather gone soft and dark with age. Nobody in Millbrook Falls could remember a version of Route 9 without Walter on it. He was simply part of the landscape, like the maple trees that lined Elm Street or the clock tower above the courthouse. He knew things about the town that no one else did, not because he pried, but because he paid attention. He knew which porch steps were starting to rot before the homeowner noticed. He knew which dogs would bark themselves hoarse and which ones just wanted a scratch behind the ears. He watched the Delacroix boy leave for college with 2 suitcases and a nervous smile. And years later, he was the one who delivered the letter announcing the boy's own son had been born. Walter carried more than mail. He carried the quiet timeline of an entire town, one envelope at a time. What nobody in Millbrook Falls knew, not his neighbors, not the postmaster he'd worked under for 4 decades, not even his own daughter, until it was far too late to ask him about it, was what Walter did with the money he almost never spent. He hadn't started life with anything close to comfort. Walter was born to a widow in a fading coal town, and by the time he was 19, he had nothing but a car to sleep in and a folder of job applications that kept coming back empty. One January morning, half frozen outside the Millbrook Falls post office, a retiring mail carrier named Eugene Whitfield noticed him. Eugene didn't ask questions. He bought the shivering young man a cup of coffee, sat with him for 20 minutes, and then walked inside and put in a good word with the postmaster. 6 months later, Walter had steady work for the first time in his life. 6 months after that, Eugene passed away quietly in his sleep, and Walter never had the chance to properly thank him, let alone repay him. So Walter decided, in a decision he never spoke aloud to another living soul, that he would repay it anyway. Not to Eugene, because Eugene was gone, but forward to whoever came next. So Walter decided, in a decision he never spoke aloud to another living soul, that he would repay it anyway. Not to Eugene, because Eugene was gone, but forward to whoever came next. In 1974, Walter opened his first investment account with $11, money he would otherwise have spent on a movie ticket that weekend. From that point forward, nearly every extra dollar that passed through his hands found its way into the same account, spread quietly across a handful of plain, unglamorous index funds. Nothing exciting, nothing anyone would brag about at a dinner party. Just steady, boring, relentless saving, year after year, decade after decade. In a battered ledger that no one else ever read, Walter gave the account a private name. He called it his Whisper Fund because it was quiet, and because it was his answer to a kindness that had once been given to him without a single word of explanation. To everyone who knew him, Walter looked like a man who simply didn't have very much. He drove the same pickup truck for nearly 30 years, long past the point where any mechanic would call it wise. He resoled his own work boots rather than buy new ones. He grew tomatoes and green beans in a garden behind his house instead of paying grocery store prices. His daughter Margaret worried sometimes that her father was too proud to accept help, never once suspecting that he simply had no interest in spending money he didn't need to spend. When Margaret was 11 years old, she once asked her father, with the blunt honesty only a child can manage, why they never had anything new, when he clearly worked so hard. Walter thought about it for a long moment before answering. He told her that new things had a way of disappearing, but that money left alone, quietly, for long enough, had a way of turning into something that could outlive both of them. At the time, Margaret assumed he was simply making an excuse for being poor. It would be nearly 40 years before she understood that he had been telling her the exact truth, in the only language he trusted. But the town loved him anyway. And, in a strange way, that love was closer to the truth than anyone realized. Every December, small gifts began appearing on the porches of families in Millbrook Falls who were quietly struggling that year. A bag of groceries here, an envelope of cash there, always left before sunrise. Never with a note, never with a name attached. For years, the town credited these gifts to the church, or to a mysterious widow 2 streets over, or simply to the spirit of the season. Nobody ever once suspected the mailman, mostly because the mailman was the last person anyone would guess had money to give away. One family on his route, the Ortegas, lost their father to a factory accident. The winter their youngest was only 4 years old. That December, and every December after it for the next 14 years, an envelope appeared on their porch before dawn. Always the same amount, always enough to cover whatever bill was weighing heaviest that year. The Ortega children grew up believing in a kind of quiet miracle they never questioned too closely, the way children learn not to question the things that keep them safe. Only after Walter's death did his ledger reveal what the family had never been able to prove. 14 entries, one for each December, each one marked simply with an initial. Old Walter died on a Tuesday in late autumn, at the age of 71, in the same modest house on Cedar Street, where he had lived for 50 years. When a substitute carrier showed up on Route 9 that week, 3 separate households called the post office within 2 days, worried, asking if Walter was all right. At the reading of his will, his daughter Margaret expected almost nothing. Her father's finances, as far as she had ever known them, were thin at the best. She sat beside the family attorney, bracing herself for a modest, unremarkable inheritance. Instead, the attorney read a number that made her set her coffee cup down without finishing the sip. $3,400,000. Built one small, unremarkable deposit at a time, compounding quietly in the dark for 48 years. While Walter drove a dying truck and grew his own vegetables and told no one. His instructions were simple and unmistakably his. 1/3 of the fund would go to Margaret and her children, along with a short handwritten note asking her only to tell people that her father had loved them, and nothing more about how. 1/3 would establish a scholarship for graduating seniors living along his old mail route, which Walter insisted, in writing, should never carry his own name. He called it simply the Route 9 Fund. And the final 1/3 would go to the Millbrook Falls Public Library, the same building where Walter had spent nearly every Sunday afternoon of his life, quietly reading newspapers he could never have afforded to buy for himself. Tucked inside the back cover of his ledger, folded into a small square, Margaret found a single handwritten line, dated the same week, in 1974, that Walter had opened his very first account. It read simply, "Eugene bought me a coffee I couldn't pay back." Maybe this is how you pay a kindness back, not to the person who gave it to you, but to everyone who comes after. The Route 9 Fund still awards its scholarship every single year. Most of the young people who receive it have no idea who Walter Higgins was, unless they think to ask, and most of them never do. They simply take the envelope, say thank you to a name on a letterhead, and walk on into whatever comes next, carrying forward, without ever knowing it, exactly what one quiet mailman once carried for all of them. The Route 9 Fund still awards its scholarship every single year. Most of the young people who receive it have no idea who Walter Higgins was, unless they think to ask, and most of them never do. They simply take the envelope, say thank you to a name on a letterhead, and walk on into whatever comes next, carrying forward without ever knowing it, exactly what one quiet mailman once carried for all of them. Walter never needed anyone to know his name. He only needed the mail to keep moving, the funds to keep compounding, and the kindness, once given to him in the cold outside a post office, to keep finding its way to somebody new. That was the whole of Walter Higgins' fortune, not the $3 million. The 42 years it took him to decide, quietly, every single day, that it was worth building.